I haven't really discussed Minnesota in the last few weeks. And I did a series last summer. How good is it? How bad is it? People will notice I'm not doing that this summer. I'm picking teams kind of at random here and just going through whether it's looking at their defense, their forward group, whatever. Because we're gonna have season previews coming up in August, anyways. So with season preview season in a couple of weeks, there's really no need for me to go through the rosters, do the how good is it, how bad is it series like last summer. It was a fun thing to do, kind of quick hits. And this is kind of a quick hit thing as well, and it's just a question about where the Minnesota Wild are at, what the Minnesota Wild need to do, and just a general. So what are they, and what does Paul Fenton think they are? Now they had 83 points this season, right? So they finished outside the playoffs. But if you're Paul Fenton, you may look at their history before that and say, well, we had 100 points or more 3 of the previous 4 seasons with a roster that was very similar to this one. Yeah, we can get it done. And they may look at St. Louis and go, you know what? St. Louis broke through. It could be our turn. Potentially, it could be our turn. They were out in the first round in 2018, 2017, and 2016. They were out in the second round in 2015 and 2014. And I don't really need to talk a lot to Minnesota fans about the ineptitude shown in the playoffs when it comes to getting those victories. And we can talk about how they were underdogs in some of those series as well, and they weren't really expected to win. But they did kind of look like a team that was spinning their wheels. Bruce Boudreau's entering year 4. This is important for a simple reason. In Washington, he was out at the start of year 5, although it was the start of his fourth full season. It would have been, and then he ends up in Anaheim right after that, right? So Anaheim, he ends up being there for a little over 4 years. So this is year 4 for him in Minnesota. He'll finish the year in all likelihood, but if they get off to a really slow start, and if Paul Fenton feels like, hey, this team should be in a playoff race, maybe Boudreau finds himself out as well towards, I'd say, December. If this team gets off to a poor October and November, Boudreau could find himself, I would think, on the block. That's just reality. You look at the roster and go, well, are they good enough? Maybe not, but it's still easier to fire the coach than to trade all the players. I also want to state this, I don't think is going to be their opening night roster. That's why I'm not paying a whole lot of attention to or taking great care with who's on what line and who's playing where. I just pulled it all from Cap Friendly. And they don't have Nico Sturm listed as being on the roster. I do think Nico Sturm ends up being in the opening night roster. But he may end up needing some time in the American League. These things happen. He only played 2 games at the end of last year. They may throw him in the American League, sort of like a ringer, in case somebody gets hurt, which they probably will, considering the age of the roster. The first thing that jumps out at you is players with red dots. Those are players 30 years of age or older. The ones in green dots are additions late in the season or off season. And purple, that's UFA next summer. So Koivu's UFA next summer. He's also 36 and he missed a lot of games last year. I can't see him playing a full 82 game schedule this year, and so Sturm likely jumps into the roster for that reason. Luke Cunnin, we're still waiting on his development into where he was expected to be. I'd make the same comment on Jordan Greenway, that Greenway was supposed to be showing a little more. But again, these kids are young, they'll learn. I don't have the ADD that a lot of people seem to. One thing that I've been going through the last few days, some people know, of course, is the idea that kids have to learn. You have to learn the game. You don't just come into the NHL and be Victor Hedman. Okay. Patrice Bergeron, when he first came into the NHL, wasn't quite what Patrice Bergeron became. So there are some young kids here who are still learning. Eric Sinek jumps out at me as a guy who didn't have a great year last year. But again, he's still young. This potential is still there. Parise I worry about because he was mostly healthy last year, right? Can that happen 2 years in a row? That's where it gets tricky. So you got Parise, Stahl, and Zucker, Fiala, Koivu, and Zuccarello. In some manner, that's your top 6. Zuccarello missed a lot of times with injury this past season. Koivu did as well. Like I said, Parise. So they need the depth. They need the depth and they need the scoring depth just in case. So Greenway, Eriksson Ek, and Donato may all end up playing time in that top 6. Now, Ryan Donato played very well for Minnesota after that trade from Boston. And the Charlie Coyle deal worked out pretty well for Boston in the playoffs. That being said, I still like Donato. I still think Minnesota's going to be very happy with the player. Hartman, Rask, and Foligno on that fourth line. I think if they can trade Rask before the season, they will. I honestly think if they could find a way out of that contract, they would have found a way out. And I don't know if it's buyout proof. I haven't really gone into it, but it's kind of got to be because Rask was brutal, and that's why you don't just trade a guy out that you think is a problem on your roster, like Nino Niederreiter was apparently, and just not think about what you're getting back. Just go, yeah, we'll take that back, and we won't really think about it. Fenton, that's a problem. So, and again, Cunning's there. He likely doesn't end up just being an extra hand. I would think he ends up on the roster. I don't have JT Brown on the board, although JT Brown played more than half of the season with the Minnesota Wild, in part due to the injuries. Hartman's going to be one of those wild cards. Can Hartman get to a 20-goal level? Can he beef up this bottom six quite a bit? Or does he end up playing on the fourth line? Does he end up playing 10, 11 minutes a game kind of thing? On the blue line, things are interesting in that Suter, I think every year as he gets older, more mileage. He's played some tough minutes in there. Just a lot of minutes for Suter. At some point, you're going to want to cut that ice time down so he's fresher later in the season. Spurgeon's in a contract year, so you can look at Jared Spurgeon and expect maybe some improvement in his numbers because contract years seem to motivate players greatly. Brodin and Dumba, that's a fantastic top four. It really is. Dumba missed a lot of last season. Minnesota fans will tell you that's a big part of why they dropped to 83 points in the season we just finished. But, the health of Dumba, as long as it's 100%, they're in better shape. They've got Sealer and Patterin and Hunt and Bartkowski. And in any way, any form that you want to make that your top six, go for it. Beyond that, and I went through their depth chart, and I don't really see anybody else who's going to push for a job right away. There are some interesting prospects that played for Iowa this past season, but I don't see anybody that I say, oh yeah, he'll definitely get a spot on that roster soon. So there's some concern that not just the team being older, but there isn't really that support yet in the AHL that can come up and produce. And maybe that's part of the reason why in the offseason they went out and got Zuccarello. Maybe that's part of the reason they went out and got Hartman. Because they looked at this team and said, you know what? We might as well go for it and try to get ourselves back into the playoff chase because, a rebuild right now this year doesn't work for us. And I'm just trying to speculate as to why, but it may very well be that ownership tells Fenton, we don't really want to do a rebuild. In net, it's going to be interesting in that Dubnyk and Stalock are their tandem. They're both signed beyond, not just for this season, but beyond it. And Dubnyk had an okay season. Decent middle-of-the-road goaltender at this stage with what he did last season. He's been better than that. He has been capable of being a top 10 goaltender in the NHL. He can get back there. It's just a matter of will he get back there with Minnesota this year. And Stalock, a capable backup goaltender who bounced around a bit before getting to Minnesota. And I can't see any situation where that's not their tandem for this season. Minnesota's in an interesting spot to me because, again, are they going to get back to being that 100-point team they were 3 seasons out of 4? Or is the 83-point season they just finished, is that closer to where reality is going to find them going forward? Are we looking at a team that drops into the 70s with their points this year and unintentionally ends up entering a rebuild while spending a lot of money on Zuccarello and some of their other, like Suter and Parise? It's still a large cap hit at this stage, and it's going to be a large cap hit for a while. They're an interesting team. I don't know that I can see this roster pushing for a spot in the Central playoffs. They are going to be the sexy pick to finish last in the division. Just letting people know now, letting Minnesota Wild fans know when the prediction games start up, Minnesota's going to be the team that gets picked to finish last in the division. Predictions have been proven very, very wrong over the last few years. Yes, mine get proven wrong as well. And so do most others because there are reasons to look at Minnesota and go, you know what, they can come back. And Dumba being healthy and part of that top 4 is a huge part of it. If their top 6 stays healthy, they can push because this is a pretty solid 4-line roster. The question mark becomes aging and health. And that's really the thing for Minnesota. So while There was a lot of talk last year about them being the oldest roster in the NHL and how old they were. That conversation will start again. Both their goaltenders being over 30 and 4 of their top 6 forwards being 30 or over as well. So we'll see how it turns out for them this year. Let me know if you're a Minnesota fan. Are you excited? Are you just relegating yourself right now to, all right, we're just not going to make it? Or how do you feel about this team at this stage? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Again, this isn't a season preview. Those will start later on. But let me know your thoughts on this. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just tap it upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.